Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Truog, Associate Director of the UW-Madison Center for Financial Security. Welcome to today's webinar on the Wisconsin Poverty Report. This webinar is part of the Family and Financial Security webinar series, sponsored by a grant from the UW-Madison School of Human Ecology Beckner Endowment. Our presenter today is Tim Smeating, UW-Madison Institute for Research on Poverty Director and Arts and Sciences Distinguished Professor. Our discussants are Mark Levitin, Director of Poverty Research, New York City Center for Economic Opportunity, and David Marcel, President, Center for Economic Progress. Quick housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties, please call 1-800-442-4614. And to submit questions for the Q&A portion of the webinar, locate the dark gray bar near the top of MediaSite, click on the Ask a Question icon, and a window will open. Please type your name, email address, and your question and hit send, and we'll be accepting questions throughout the webinar. So with that, I'll turn things over to Tim. Tim?
Thank you, Nicole. It's really nice to be here, everybody. Hope you can hear me fine. I'm Tim Smeating, and I'm going to report on how the safety net protected Wisconsin families from poverty in 2010. You should be able to see that on your screen. And why don't we get started? Now, 4 years ago, as part of efforts to work with then Governor Doyle's Poverty Task Force, we decided that we would create a separate Wisconsin poverty measure. This is part of what we call in Wisconsin the Wisconsin idea, meaning that the boundaries of the university are the state, and the university should give something back to the state. And we thought it would be important for the state to know how major programs aimed at the poor were doing. So that's exactly what we did. We released this report on April 25th, just a week and a half ago. And I think it's pretty surprising, but I want to explain it to you. I'm going to tell you what we found, why we found what we found, what does it mean, and the bottom line is the safety net is working in Wisconsin. On Wisconsin. The idea is to develop a more comprehensive measure of poverty that reflects federal and state programs aimed at the poor during the recession, especially non-cash programs and refundable tax credits. See the next slide. As you will find out, these aren't at all accounted for in official poverty data, and that's just ridiculous. We also want to inform the Wisconsin public and its policymakers about the effects of programs that we've instituted to fight poverty, including those through the American Recovery and Relief Act. We then also wanted to tailor this measure to policies and priorities of Wisconsin citizens, nonprofits, and policymakers. We talked to hundreds, literally, of Wisconsin people as we put this together. We asked them what they thought was important. We told them what we were trying to do, and we tweaked it to meet their needs. This is their measure, okay? And also at the beginning, we're to provide a transparent, straightforward model for other states and localities to emulate. We were sponsored a bit by the Census Bureau on that, and the Institute for Research on Poverty, which I direct as well. Both of those are federally funded. Now, here is a picture about how programs have changed in Wisconsin and the U.S. to help the poor. You can see these two lines, the green one and the purple one, going up into the roof. Those are SNAP. We call that food share or food stamps in Wisconsin. Food share is the name we use. And you can see that the earned income tax credit is going up. Both of those would be up in the top corner of the chart in 2011, meaning they were more than $75 billion each. In addition, there were $50 billion of refundable tax credits. Those aren't reflected at all in the official poverty measure. AFDC TAMF, which was tremendously non-responsive, you can see it falling in a recession, is included in cash benefits, but only approximately 30% of that money actually is in cash. The rest is in services, some of which help reduce the Wisconsin poverty measure too. And SSI, which is aimed at the age of blind and disabled, which has been increasing as well. But the big guns were the refundable tax credits and SNAP, and we have to recognize that right off the bat. So we did our first basic report for the Governor's Task Force. We did not do the Wisconsin poverty measure. We just took federal figures and reported them with some emphasis on what we can learn within Wisconsin as well as across Wisconsin, and I'll show you some of that. Then we spent our time listening. In 2010, we released the new Wisconsin measure for the first time, and this is the third release today. And we're going to be able to look at program impacts done from 2008, 9, and 10. Okay? So there's two methods of poverty measurement, and I'm just going to give you a quick overview. Every poverty calculation needs two things: a threshold or some measure of economic need, and it also needs some resources that you compare to those needs to see if you're poor or not. And then different types of families may require different treatment because tax units aren't the same as food stamp units and so forth. So I'm going to contrast the official poverty measure in the U.S. with the Wisconsin poverty measure. The official poverty line was set in 1960. It was almost half of the median family's income then. It is now below 30% of the median family's income. It has been increased only by prices. It's about $22,000 a year for a family of four. We'll see more of that in a minute. There's the information that goes with it. The standard of resources used are cash income before taxes. So Social Security is in there, unemployment compensation is in there. Both of those are important programs in fighting poverty. As I said, a little bit of TAMF is in there, SSI, but none of the big guns are in there. So it includes government cash transfers and so on. And the families considered are the census family unit, which means you have to be related by blood, marriage, or adoption. If you cohabit and live with your girlfriend or boyfriend, you're treated like two separate individuals, even if you share the same household. That's wrong. So the Wisconsin poverty measure picks up on a National Academy of Sciences-like measure, which actually the first work in the state and local level was done by Mark Levitan and his colleagues in New York, and I'm happy to have Mark comment on it today. But the National Academy of Sciences decided that it should count the things that we think are important, and the poverty line should be based on basic expenses for food, clothing, and shelter averaged over 3 years. That was their belief. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. Okay? So a poverty line not set in the 1960s, but one that changes in 3-year averages and reflects expenditures on these basic goods by real families at about the 40th percentile of the income or the consumption distribution. In other words, low-income families. We adjusted that, of course, for Wisconsin cost of living, for housing tenure within Wisconsin, which means that you have a lower poverty line if you own your home outright, like most elderly do. So you're not paying a mortgage, so you need less money for mortgage. It also reflects if you're an owner and paying a mortgage or if you're a renter. And it reflects differences in cost of living within Wisconsin. So it's adjusted for the fact that if it's $100 to live in Wisconsin, to live in Waukesha and the rich Milwaukee suburbs, it's $108 or $109. To live in the far northwest and Superior, it's only $93. So we adjust for the fact of what housing costs. That's really important to do in Wisconsin, we think. And we added on allowance for medical expenses because we treat them as a tax. In other words, it's something you have to spend, and it can't be used normally for food, clothing, shelter, or utilities. We added more family resources. We took all the census stuff and we added taxes and refundable tax credits. So we subtracted payroll taxes, which most low-income working families, and that's most low-income non-elderly families, paid. And we added back in the tax credits, a number of them. And we'll talk about them in a minute. We added non-cash benefits like food stamp, SNAP, or food share back in. We subtracted work expenses. People were very clear in Wisconsin. Look, I live in a cheaper area because the housing's cheaper, but I have to put my money in the gas tank to get to work and back, and you better reflect that. Yes. I'm a single parent. I have to pay child care to work. I get some subsidy from the state, and that's helpful, but I still have to spend money. That ought to be reflected. I agreed, the National Academy agreed too. And we expanded the poverty unit to include the census family and unmarried partners and foster children, none of which are in the other measure. And we took out college students. College students who don't live on campus, let's say 4 of them sharing a house somewhere just off campus in Madison, are treated like 4 separate individuals, and they all say, hey, I'm in school, I didn't earn anything, and they're all poor, despite the fact that there's a BMW in the side yard or a couple of motor scooters. Forget about it. They're out of there. That makes a 2 percentage point difference in poverty in Wisconsin and Madison and La Crosse, which are 2 big resident schools. Now, here's how it stacks up. The official poverty measure has a line of about $22,113. The Wisconsin line's $3,800 higher in 2010. And again, it reflects these expenditures and necessities. The 2009 Wisconsin poverty measure was higher, about $250 higher. And the 2008 was a little higher. Well, why is the poverty line falling? It's simple. It's falling because it reflects people's standards of living. The middle class in this state and other states is tightening its belt in the recession. Low-income people have tightened their belt in the recession. So the poverty line actually falls. And it falls with the behavior of low-income families. That is really important. Now, what do we find? And here comes the red lights. Poverty rates in Wisconsin under the Wisconsin poverty measure were lower than the official rates and fell by a significant amount over the last 2 years. The recession-plagued economy drove market income poverty higher. So in other words, if you had income, as you'll see in a minute, based on your own earnings, that poverty was worse because the market wasn't working very well, as you'll see in Wisconsin, the labor market in particular. But the safety net worked, and it worked very well in Wisconsin. So we're going to look at 3 sets of poverty rates in a bunch of graphs. First one's market income. The idea is, can you get to that $25,000 line based on your own pensions, your own earnings, your own private investments, whatever's private, nothing to do with government, no tax and transfers. Then we're going to look at the official measure poverty rates, which are based only on pre-tax cash income, as I mentioned, which go up quite a bit. And then we're going to look at the Wisconsin poverty measure, which includes all the stuff I mentioned before. And here's what we find. In the top line, you can see market income poverty going up. That's what happens in recessions. People lose their jobs. They have to find jobs at lower wages. They're involuntarily working part-time. They're not working at all. That means more market income poverty. Okay? The pink line, which starts at 10.2 and goes to 13, that's a pretty big increase. That's the official poverty rate. Now the red line with the diamonds, that is the Wisconsin poverty measure. And it didn't change from 2008 to 2009. In other words, those are 11.2, 11.1s within a reasonable range of error. But 10.3 is significantly lower. So we've got poverty in Wisconsin going opposite of the national trend that everyone reads about that doesn't reflect all the stuff that we do, and going the opposite way because of the market. And so my job is to tell you why this happened, how it happened, and so forth. We're doing fine on time. Okay. I just mentioned this. Market income rises. Okay, we did that. The data we use are the 2010 American Community Survey, and it covers a long period. It covers January 2009 and November 2010, as we'll see below. Now, the problem in Wisconsin during this period is the number of jobs fell by about 5% in the recession, and they've stayed there. They're still there. We are last in the nation in job creation in this state. Okay? The benefits from SNAP, or the food share program, rose quickly in Wisconsin, in part due to the former governor's poverty task force and active efforts by nonprofits, by interested public, by churches, and by public sector workers that if you go apply for a program which is income tested, you find out about food share or SNAP, and you apply for it and you get it. Okay? And so food share beneficiaries increased faster in Wisconsin than in the nation as a whole. You see that here. You see the black line, the black vertical line or horizontal line at the bottom says time period covered by the ACS. There's our time period. The blue line is jobs in Wisconsin. You can see, blank, because of the recession. And it stayed pretty even through 2010 and 2011. Next year, when we look at the report, we have a little bit of a bump, but it hasn't changed much at all. So we lost a lot of jobs, and that's why that market income poverty rate went up. How about SNAP? On the left-hand side, we have the Wisconsin SNAP rolls. And you can see that the blue line at the bottom with the diamonds, that's Milwaukee. Milwaukee's always been a high poverty area. Back in 2006, Milwaukee was almost half of the total state caseload. Milwaukee didn't go up much. The rest of the state, which was ravaged by the recession, that's the black line went up. And when you put the two together at the very top, you see that during the recession, SNAP beneficiaries increased by 67% in Wisconsin. Okay? The black line which refers to the right axis, is the national trends in SNAP or food stamps, and they're not nearly as steep. So we did a much better job than the rest of the nation in getting people into this program. Okay? Now, I have to report, since I've given this report, the May 2012, the Legislative Audit Bureau report for Wisconsin for food share came out. In 2011, not the 800,000 you just saw, 1.1 million persons got $1.1 billion in SNAP in Wisconsin. Okay? All of these people have incomes below 133% of the official poverty line, by the way. Okay? Our error rates from incorrectly denying benefits fell. We got an award for that. The benefit payment error rate fell from 7.4 to 2%. We got an award for that. And the papers, however, didn't report any of this stuff. They reported the fact that the lab estimated that 293 prison inmates received food share benefits when they were incarcerated in Wisconsin. 263 out of 1,100,000. Okay? Statistically insignificant. So essentially, Lab is saying this program works, and it's gotten to work better over the years, and our numbers prove it. Now we have the Earned Income Tax Credit and Refundable Tax Credits, okay? In 2009, the American Recovery and Relief Act increased federal income tax credits, but expanded the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Refundable Child Credit, and created a Making Work Pay Tax Credit. You only get these if you work. If you work, you get something extra if your earnings aren't enough to support your family the way it should be in a recession. Wisconsin's credit added another 14% in the top. So there's a 21% increase in the total amount of just EITC credits alone in Wisconsin to $780 million in 2009. But if you included all of the other credits, including refundable tax credit and so forth, and all the state tax refunds and so forth, that increased by more than 50% between 2008 and 2009. This is a big amount of money. It can be $6,000 and $7,000 for a family of 2 and 3, and that's real money. Okay? And this is going to continue through next year, too. And next year, we'll have the 2% payroll tax cut. So all of these things affect poor people, and that's why we're counting them. All right. Now we're going to look at more results. We're going to look at the level and trend for vulnerable groups, children and the elderly. And we're going to find that child poverty is still above average, but it's close to the overall rate. Child poverty fell as well. Elderly poverty rates were pretty flat. So here we go. Here's 3 bars. The first set of bars, market income only measures, the light pink. You can see that those are higher. The official measure reduced it some, and the Wisconsin measure did a heck of a lot better. And in fact, the Wisconsin measure is 10 or 11% for everybody, including children, elderly, and adults. Is this good? It's better than the official. Is it good enough? No. 1 in 9 kids poor in this country is something we should be embarrassed about, but we're doing a great job with what we've got in Wisconsin compared to how other people do. All right? Here's the elderly. It stayed pretty flat. The elderly poverty rate's above the official mainly because, as you'll see, a subtraction of taxes, the health care costs that they paid. So here's 4 policy levers that affect poverty. 2 on the resource side. If you get more money in refundable tax credits, you're less likely to be poor. If you get non-cash benefits like SNAP, that's food share, public housing, or LIHEAP, that raises your income, you're less likely to be poor. If you have CARES and other programs like we do in Wisconsin that subsidize child care for working parents, your work-related expenses are lower, and therefore your poverty is lower. And if you have a program like Badger Care, which we are god-awful proud of in this state, we have the second least number of uninsured children. Only 6% of children in Wisconsin don't have insurance because of Badger Care. Badger Care goes up to 185% of the poverty line. It works for the parents of these kids, too, and it provides a real safety net. And it reduces out-of-pocket outlays. So if Badger Care reduces out-of-pocket outlays for health care, that means you've got more to spend on everything else, and again, poverty goes down. So here's 4 levers. How do those levers work? Here you go. Taxes, 8, 9, 10. Refundable taxes took 2.2 points off of overall poverty, and SNAP another 2.1 points. Those are big effects. Housing helped, energy assistance helped. Work-related expenses add to poverty because they're high, but they got lower because of increased child care subsidies and because medical care out-of-pocket expenses increased more slowly in Wisconsin than in the rest of the country. So all four levers are working. Here's children. Now, for children, obviously the earned income tax credit is given to families with children. It is bigger if you have more kids. You get more refundable credits for your kids if you have more kids. So it had a 5.8 percentage point effect on child poverty. That's big. SNAP, 4.1. Bigger in 2010 than 2009, mainly because of the American Recovery and Relief Act and because the governor pushed these programs. The other programs had some effect too, as you can see. And for the elderly, it's all driven by medical out-of-pocket expenses. And in fact, the effect of medical expenses on raising poverty was greater in 2010 on the right than 2009, which means that out-of-pocket medical expenses pushed more elderly into poverty in 2010 than the year before. Now, so much for Wisconsin as a state. What goes on within Wisconsin? The ACF is big enough for us to look right within the state of Wisconsin, and we did. And we looked at poverty across counties within the state with two areas that have higher poverty rates than the state average, significantly higher. This means these are different, statistically different. Chippewa, Eau Claire, and Milwaukee. And we have many areas with below state average poverty rates. For instance, Waukesha, Ozaukee, Washington County. Those are the rich ring around Milwaukee, and Washington and Brown counties too. But still, even with all of this, within Milwaukee County, we have 5 areas, and poverty rates within Milwaukee County, as you'll see in a minute, varied from 5% in the good areas to 36% in the worst areas. There's a lot of economic segregation within Milwaukee County, and you'll see it in just a minute. So here's our state picture, okay? The pink ones are not statistically significant from the state average. Dane is pink, for instance. The white ones are lower, and the red ones are higher. So here you can see that, there still are some pockets of poverty in the state, but the rest is doing pretty well. Here is Milwaukee County. You can see in the middle, the dark thing in the middle, central Milwaukee has a 36% poverty rate. Inner north, outer north, still above average. But look at Brown Deer, Glendale, Shorewood, Wauwatosa, Whitefish Bay, and other, meaning the rich suburbs. Poverty is 5.3%, and it's even lower in the ring around Milwaukee, in the white counties that surround Milwaukee, Waukesha, Washington, Ozaukee. Okay? So here's the classic example of we know where the poverty is and where we have to deal with it, and it's not in the rich suburbs. Okay. Our conclusion, in times of need, the safety net that enhances earnings for families with children, you have to earn to get the ITC, and puts food on the table. Food stamps put food on the table. The average benefit is under $400 a month nationwide, and in Wisconsin it was $238 a month. That's not a hammock that allows you to go and say, I got $238 worth of SNAP, I don't have to work, I can just lay back and be a welfare king. Baloney! It doesn't pass the test. All Wisconsinites should be proud of the fact that our programs work. Now, don't get me wrong, and I say it 3 times in the report, the recession had a substantial negative effect on housing, jobs, debt, and the middle class, particularly the lower middle class, where you had 2 workers in, let's say, 2008 or 2009 who made $40,000 each. One of them lost their jobs. You're still middle class, you're not poor, but you're a lot worse off. You've gone into debt. Your housing prices are down. There is foreclosure in Wisconsin and so forth. But the poor, the very, very bottom, $25,000 and under, were protected in this state during this period. Now, next year with some sponsorship, I'll explain in a minute, we hope to show that poverty fell not because of income support programs, and that's not the solution. We want that market income poverty to go down. We want more people to have jobs. We want jobs that pay enough to keep families from poverty. But if they don't, we've got these programs like refundable tax credits that you only get if you work, and SNAP to help save the day. We should be proud of that in Wisconsin. With additional money, we can look at racial and ethnic dimensions of poverty in Wisconsin, including within Milwaukee. We can look at the effects of the recession on the near poor and the lower middle class, those between $25,000 and $50,000 a year, where there have nationwide been big effects. In the nation as a whole, 57% of children are growing up in families with incomes less than twice the poverty line. In other words, families with incomes less than $50,000. Okay? Those kids don't do nearly as well as the kids of the college professors or a lot of people watching this webinar. All right? And we can look more deeply at EITC and SNAP as well. So you can find the report online at IRP. And there is a link to a longer methodological technical reports as well, which you might want to look at if this is your cup of tea. I want to thank the Wisconsin Poverty Measure team, Yayon Chung, Julia Isaacs, and Katie Thornton. I want to thank funding from ASPE and the Census Bureau so far. And I want to thank input from the stakeholders in Wisconsin, national, state, and local experts like Mark Leviton, and the use of administrative data housed at IRP, which allows us to make sure that all the food stamps we spent were accounted for and all the tax refunds we got in Wisconsin were distributed. There's no underreporting here. It's all there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim. So with that, we're going to turn things over to Mark. Mark, go ahead.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and let me begin by thanking the Center for Financial Security for the opportunity to participate in today's webinar, and I want to extend congratulations to Tim and his colleagues on their report. I'm going to offer some perspective from New York City on poverty and policy in the Great Recession. Next slide, please. But let me begin by just saying a little bit about the Center for Economic Opportunity. The center was created by Mayor Michael Bloomberg in 2006. The center oversees and evaluates over a score of innovative programs that address poverty in New York City. But in addition to program innovation, CEO was also asked to create a poverty measure useful for policymaking. And we were told that this measure should do two things. It should account for more of what public policies do to support low-income families. Secondly, it should compare those resources against the poverty threshold that reflects the relatively high cost of living in New York City. To implement our charge, we have, like our colleagues in Madison, adopted the National Academy of Sciences recommendations and employ the American Community Survey as our principal data set. A particular and unique challenge to New York City is capturing, the peculiar nature of the city's housing market. It's an important discussion, but what I want to emphasize, let's look at the next slide, for the purposes of our conversation today, is how our measure compares to the Wisconsin measure. And I would describe them as siblings. Can we look at the next slide, please? Not identical twins. In particular, there's an important difference in our poverty threshold. In November of last year, the Census Bureau issued a supplemental poverty measure. So this is the Census Bureau's effort to emulate the recommendations from the National Academy of Sciences. And in order to make our findings comparable to what the Census Bureau was showing for the U.S. as a whole, we decided to go with the federal supplemental poverty measures U.S.-wide threshold. And that creates a big difference between the CEO and Wisconsin results. And you'll see that as we get into the conversation. So let's look at the next slide, where we can see how the conceptual apparatus we've created looks when it's applied to the data. And so the first thing to notice here is that we're comparing official against CEO thresholds, income, and poverty rates. When we get to the slide, you'll see that the official data is given in orange. Here we go. And the CEO data is given in light blue. And so let's begin with this threshold. So these are poverty thresholds for 2-adult, 2-child families. And the official threshold in 2010 in that year was a little over $22,000. The U.S.-wide supplemental poverty measure threshold was a little bit over $24,000 in that year. So now we're adjusting that U.S.-wide threshold upward to account for the relatively high cost of living in New York City. So our New York City threshold is about 23% higher than the U.S.-wide SPM threshold. And essentially what we're saying is that in New York City it takes $1.23 to obtain the same standard of living that on average you could get with $1 across the U.S. The next two bars measure income at the 20th percentile of their respective distributions. So when we add in all the uncounted forms of resources that go to low-income families, you can see that our measure of income produces a much higher number. So instead of a little less than 23% pre-tax cash, which is the official measure of income, our measure of income is over $29,000. Oh, went too far. Okay, so how does this affect poverty rates? So we have a CEO threshold, which is approximately 36% higher than the official threshold. And our income measure is approximately 28% higher than the official income measure. So when we apply income against thresholds, we see that we have a CEO poverty rate for 2010 of 21%, an official poverty rate of 18.8%. So what that's telling us is that the effect of our much higher threshold outweighs the effect of our more inclusive measure of income. So we have a higher rate of poverty with our measure than the official measure. This is true in 2010, and it's true for all the years for which we have a poverty measure. Let's move on to the next slide. So we want to really take a look at how poverty has changed over time. And what you can see here, we've got now 6 years of data that when the economy was expanding, our CEO poverty rate was falling. 2008 in New York City was a cyclical high for employment and incomes and a cyclical low for the poverty rate. Our recession started later than the U.S.-wide recession. So since 2008, of course, the poverty rate has begun to rise. And in order to understand that rise, we want to take a look at three things. Labor market conditions, declines in employment and earnings. Let's go back to that slide. You were just there. We want to look at the policy response to the recession, in particular the effect of expanded tax programs and growth in the food stamp program. And then thirdly, because measuring poverty is about comparing incomes to a threshold, how the poverty threshold changes. Can we advance, please? So this is what we just discussed. Let's move on to the next slide. So here are two labor market indicators for the working age population, people 18 through 64 years of age. And the first thing we'll get to see is what we call the employment population ratio. What share of the population was holding a job? And you can see when we get to it, I'll wait for the slide to come up. Here we go. Okay, so you can see a declining employment population ratio from 2008 to 2010. Poverty is an annual measure, and so it's also interesting to look at how many weeks worked over the prior 12 months did people have, in these years. And you can see the orange section of these bars here. We have a declining share of the working age population that was working at least 50 weeks over the course of the year, and a rising share of this population that had no weeks worked at all. Next slide, please. So the decline in employment and the steadiness of work over a course of a year had a big effect on family-level earnings. And the next table shows you measures of family-level earnings in the lower part of the earnings distribution, from the median on down. And when we get to it, we'll see two important things. Well, first thing here is the line the row that's in red sort of represents what earnings are to families who are close to the poverty threshold. So it's particularly interesting. What really is striking here is that these declines in earnings are very large. Moreover, the decline from 2009 to 2010 is much greater than the decline from 2008 to 2009. So other forms of income had a bigger job to do from 2009 to 2010 than they did from 2008 to 2009. So while earnings were declining, let's look at the next slide, we had an impressive policy response to the recession. And part of that was extended unemployment insurance, but then there's what Tim referred to as the big guns. In particular, the expanded and new tax programs that were begun by President Bush and then with President Obama with the Recovery Act and then the food stamp program, both the increase in benefit levels and a big increase in participation, in part due to just what happens to food stamps when we have a labor market contraction, but also a very significant city outreach effort to increase participation. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what we're going to look at first is how important income taxes were in this period to low-income filers. So we're looking at filers with dependents and adjusted gross income no more than $50,000. And I'll pause for a sec till we get the slide up. Otherwise, what I'm saying won't make any sense to you. Here we go. So the blue bars indicate how much income was going to these filers. So this is income after credits have been applied to tax liabilities. And as you can see, we have in 2008 $2.3 billion, and that goes up to about $2.5 billion by 2010. The orange bars are our estimate of what the net effect of income taxes would have been without the expansion of tax credits in the Bush and Obama recovery packages. So this is the hypothetical income tax effect. As you can see, in 2008, the hypothetical is about $750 million below the actual, and that gap grows to over $1 billion by 2010. Can we move to the next slide? The next slide performs a sort of similar analysis looking at food stamps. So we have, again, blue bars showing actual food stamp benefits and orange bars that are showing what food stamp benefits would have been without the increase in the benefit level and our estimate of what would have happened without the extra effort put in by the city to draw people into the food stamp program. And you can see there's just enormous growth in the aggregate value of benefits from a little bit under $1.4 billion to over $2.7 billion by 2010. A lot of this increase would have happened without this, but without the added work that was going on at the federal and city level, but still, important effects. So, what does all this mean for income and poverty? So let's take a look at the next slide. So what we've done in this slide, I'll start talking about it and then we can look at it, is to provide 4 measures of income. And in each of these, we're tracking them relative to their value in 2008. I'll just pause for a sec so we can catch up. So just starting at the bottom and working up. So The first black line here is family-level earnings. As you can see, by 2010, earnings had fallen to about 85% of their level in 2008. The next line is official income. So this is cash, including cash assistance, which would have been about 92% of its 2008 level. The next line, that green line, is what CEO income would have been absent the economic stimulus packages. And it would have been 96% of its 2008 level. And then we've got a light blue line, and that's the full CEO income. So this includes the effect of the stimulus program. And that is 99.5% of its 2008 level. So what you're seeing here is that as the measures of income become ever more inclusive, they become ever more stable over time. But of course, measuring poverty means comparing incomes against thresholds. And so the red line is our threshold, which grew by 1.5% from 2008 to 2009 and 2.7% from 2009 to 2010. So by 2010, it's 4.3% above where it was in 2008. Let's take a look quickly at the next slide. So in this slide, we're looking at the actual poverty rate that you've seen before, rising from 19% to 21% in 2010. But the thing I want to point out here is what the poverty rate would have been absent the expansion of the tax and food stamp programs. And it would have reached 23.7% in 2010. Finally, I think it's a good idea to take a look at how poverty would have changed over time if we had used different notions about how the poverty threshold should grow over time. So let's take a look at the next slide. So what we're comparing here is our poverty rate in 2008 of 19%. And starting at the top, the first number you'll see when we get there is that 21% we've been seeing in the prior slide. The next thing we did was to say, well, what would have happened if the change in the poverty rate had just been what the official measure does, just changes things by the change in the consumer price index. So that only rose by 1.3% from 2008 to 2010. We would have ended up with a poverty rate of 19.9% in 2010. So quite a bit more modest, though still a statistically significant change. Suppose we had just not changed the poverty threshold at all, used our 2008 poverty threshold against the 2010 data, the poverty rate in 2010 would have been 19.6%. So the value of that last exercise is to just isolate how much of the change in the poverty rate was due to the change in income as opposed to the change in the threshold. So next slide, please. So what do we take away from all this? I think the big lesson here, and it's the same lesson you see in the Wisconsin story, is that policy does indeed affect poverty. The expansion of tax programs and food stamps bolstered incomes and blunted what would have been a very sharp rise in the New York City poverty rate from 2008 to 2010. There was an increase, and it was generated by two things. One, a modest fall in CEO income, and, not to be neglected, a rising CEO threshold. So I think there's some policy lessons and questions that we ought to be addressing in response to our findings. And the first thing has to do with our safety net. We've been telling people now for 15 or more years that the path out of poverty is work plus benefits. What I don't think we've adequately grappled with is what happens when jobs are scarce. The other thing that our report speaks to is poverty among families living with children. Poverty rate for children in New York City is, with our measure, is very high, over 25%. Poverty rate for children, for people living in families with children, rose over this period at the same order of magnitude as the population as a whole. And what we know about families with children that are close to the poverty line is that they blend earnings and public benefits. And the question for us is, do we have the right balance? And I really wish we lived in a world where these were the things that we were discussing. But instead, we have what's going on in Washington. Next slide, please. And, the thing that I want to leave you with, maybe the most important takeaway in our conversation is that the programs that work in Wisconsin, the programs that have such a big effect in New York City, they're all in peril. The tax programs, the tax credits that were established by Presidents Bush and Obama are all set to expire at the end of this year. Food stamp benefits are going to be cut in 2011. There's some very scary proposals about block granting the food stamp program that threaten to undermine its role as an anti-cyclical stabilizer. And this is what we really need to focus on in the coming months and maybe the coming years. Next slide, please. So thanks again for the opportunity to participate. The next slide has a link to our reports, and you can see our work in all its gory or magnificent details. Also is my email address, and if you want to follow up, feel free to drop me a line. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. And before we turn things over to David, I just want to remind our participants to go ahead and submit questions if you have a question for the Q&A portion. So, David, we'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. Hopefully you're hearing me loud and clear. I'm coming up in the rear here and do not have a presentation for you to look at, so hopefully the words will carry some weight. I did have to laugh during Mark's presentation when he kept talking about CEO income. I think for those of us in the trenches fighting poverty, we would love to see actual chief executive officer income at the level that you're using CEO income when you describe things in New York City. But all humor aside, I think connecting back to Tim's presentation, as someone who is on in Chicago and Illinois, just south of Wisconsin, we have only to look north to the state literally on top of us on the map to see what are the benefits of having a robust policy infrastructure, and I think a strong commitment to fighting poverty within state policies to see the impact. I do think it is important to note that in addition to the impact of food stamps and federal tax credits and some of the other things that Tim highlighted, that Wisconsin also has a very progressive income tax code, at least as compared to Illinois, but I think as compared to most states, and that indeed the value of the state earned income tax credit is quite significant when compared to many other states that have a state EITC. So an example in Wisconsin, despite some cutbacks, a family with 3 or more children actually gets 34 cents on the dollar on top of a dollar of federal EITC. So, again, highlighting some of Tim's points, I mean, we are talking, when you combine all of these tax credits, especially for families with children, refunds that can total $6,000, $7,000, even $8,000. So as someone kind of on the front lines and in the trenches doing this work, representing, in this case, I run the Center for Economic Progress in Chicago and Illinois. We're a statewide organization that is a big player in the work around connecting the EITC, public benefits, access to asset-building opportunities, bringing our services to communities around the city, around the suburbs, and the state. That this kind of data, this kind of work, is critically important for us as we look to how to measure what our impact is in a broader policy context. I did want to highlight a few things from Tim's presentation. One thing is, I think there is a clear issue here with respect to the timing and impact of some of these benefits that increasingly low-income families are really reliant on. The SNAP program, at least because of the payment mechanism once you're determined eligible, is a monthly payment. The big problem in relying on refundable tax credits is that, as many of us who do this work know, it is generally paid out as a lump sum payment rather than spread out over the course of the year. So I do question and I worry at heart that the tendency among taxpayers, and this is all taxpayers, to take a lump sum refund to actually over-withhold means that the actual impact from a household budget, from a kind of financial management perspective, is blunted somewhat, and indeed has set up, as we all know, a cottage industry of paid tax preparers and people who are skimming significant dollars out of people's pockets who are claiming these credits. I do think another thing of great, benefit to people living in Wisconsin is clearly the administrative mechanisms at the state level, at least under the prior governor, moved very quickly for people to be approved for eligibility with respect to SNAP and some of the other programs. I did want to highlight in Tim's presentation, I do think something he mentioned, but I think, again, for those of us doing the work, it's so important to understand fully how, at least in the case of refundable tax credits at the federal level, they're overwhelmingly tilted to benefit households with children. And again, that was, I think, chart number figure 8 as compared to figure 7 in Tim's presentation. I think where we get into some challenges, and certainly we have seen this in Chicago and the work that we do nationally through the National Community Tax Coalition, is the limited impact on some of these benefits and credits on childless workers. The EITC is incredibly small for those who cannot claim children for the EITC. Indeed, they're eligible for SNAP benefits in relatively limited amounts, but a lot of these programs have very little impact for those who cannot claim children living with them and meet the various eligibility tests. I did want to mention a few numbers that I think tie back to what Mark and Tim talked about. The monetary value and the increase at the federal level in some of these credits, both ironically established under President Bush and then expanded under President Obama, are absolutely huge. So not only has the Earned Income Tax Credit grown enormously and is now paying out almost $60 billion to 27 million households across the country, but the child tax credit actually represented $27.5 billion for 22 million families. Now, many of these may be more middle-income families than low-income, but low-income families increasingly in our work on the ground running free tax preparation centers, we see huge numbers of families benefiting from the child tax credit. One group that is particularly kind of caught in the crosshairs of a policy debate now are those families headed up by undocumented immigrants, those who file with ITINs. There have been numerous policy proposals that have made it quite far in the House of Representatives to eliminate the child tax credit for families, even if they have U.S. citizen children, if the primary tax filer does not have a Social Security number. And indeed, the way the child tax credit the policy was originally written, it was regardless of immigration status, whereas the EITC only flows to any household where the primary taxpayer is someone with a Social Security number. Another credit of enormous value in recent years was the American Opportunity Tax Credit, tied very much to education, but because it was made refundable, actually brought back $7.6 billion to 8.8 million tax filers, and with huge numbers of people having returned to college, whether community college, career schools, or four-year schools, this has been a valuable supplement helping to cover basic household budgets and the cost of going to college. I did want to make a few remarks and then turn it over for questions. I think we are living in a time where the policy debate is fast and furious. around the future of many of these tax credits, as well as the SNAP program and the increases in SNAP. We, as many people know, are the subsidiary. We recently launched the National Community Tax Coalition, which we were very proud to establish 9 years ago, actually. Puts out absolutely great work along with folks like the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, looking at some of the policy issues around the Earned Income Tax Credit. There's a policy brief put out earlier this year, which you can get at the National Community Tax Coalition website, tax-coalition.org, called the Earned Income Tax Credit, Good for Our Families, Communities, and Economy, which not only spells out some of the arguments I think that were made earlier by both Mark and Tim, but also some of the myths that are out there. For example, one of the more intriguing ones is that the EITC actually is primarily a short-term income support, and that fully 42% of households only claim the credit for 1 year at a time. I think refuting the argument that EITC is in any way akin to welfare or similar to a welfare program. I think another thing in this policy brief, very important, is to talk about the economic multiplier of the EITC. For those of us who work in the trenches every day, we always have to make the argument for why funding for our work is important, and to demonstrate that the value is not only on households, as Mark and Tim's research indicates, but actually on local economies, and that local economies benefit enormously from increased spending power by low-income families. And then at this time that we have seen a number of state EITCs reduced, including in Wisconsin, we have a huge opportunity as those of us who are also advocates at heart to make sure that we focus on the fact that all of these credits, the expansions, are due to expire at the end of this year, and that we need to really focus a lot of our attention to Washington, D.C., and to making sure that we don't lose these incredibly valuable credits, benefits, and supports that have made such a huge difference for low-income working families. I would encourage people to go to the NCTC website, tax-coalition.org, to find out more about how to get involved in advocacy work. And the last thing I'd leave you with just is, I think that we have incredible research and data that's been shared here by Mark and Tim, but I think we really have to work on the messaging and the sound bites. I think there's a lot of complexity here to these arguments, but I think we need to absolutely refute any arguments that have been made that the Recovery Act, aspects of the Recovery Act, specifically those highlighted in these two presentations, haven't had an impact on households and families. They've had a demonstrated impact, and we need to overcome some of the ideological divide to really make that point and bring it home. So I appreciate very much being here today and wanted to turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you so much, David. So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to just turn it over to Tim if you have anything you'd like to respond to that Mark or David said.
Well, I want to thank Mark and David. I know them both. They're good guys, and they're good work, and they are good analysts. And I would agree. There are two messages here. Number one, whether you're in Wisconsin or New York or the nation as a whole, these programs work. They're intended to keep people from being poor, and they did a good job. The second message is, yes, they are all threatened. Already in Wisconsin, we have cut our state earned income tax credit from 14% of the federal to 11%. With that flat trend in jobs that I saw at the beginning, that's not going to help next year. Other things will help. I think in 2011 and 2012, when we get to look at them, because these programs are still in place and some of them even strengthened, we're still going to see big impacts. But at the end of this year, if nothing happens, the higher refundable tax credits go. If we have to sequester or otherwise cut budgets next year, SNAP benefits are going to be cut. And those are going to hurt poor people. I wish, again, we had enough jobs that paid enough that we would find that we didn't need to help families feed their kids or put roofs over their kids' heads. We need those things. Those things have worked. We should all be proud of that. I guess that's the message.
Great. Thanks so much, Tim. Well, I'd like to thank our speakers and all of our participants as well. Today's webinar will be archived at cfs.wisc.edu within 1 week. And I just wanted to mention that the webinar series was actually awarded the Sonic Foundry Rich Media Impact Award in the Excellence in Education category just this morning. So thank you to everyone who's played a role in this. And our series will return in the fall. Stay tuned for details over the summer. If you'd like to provide any feedback on the 2011-2012 series, please feel free to email me. So have a great day, and thank you to everyone for participating.